Matthew Buckley Smith, and you are listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you all for listening. Thanks especially to any of you who have taken a moment sometime this week to recommend the show to a friend, enemy, colleague, or passerby. That's the way the word gets out about SLEERICKETS, so I appreciate it. It'll give you more interesting things to talk about with the people who happen to be in your orbit, especially after today's episode, which is one I fear that if you are someone who has any significant interest in contemporary poetry, then I fear this is a subject it is unlikely you will have neutral feelings about. It seems very likely that you'll feel inspired to write an angry letter to me after today's episode, possibly to Cameron. And honestly, I'm not even sure which direction you'll be angry in. So here's what happened. I'll give you the spiel, and then I have a little bit other housekeeping stuff. But basically, I had planned for on my calendar. Joanna's out of town; she's at this book conference, and I had planned to have a normal, adult, sane, healthy Monday night conversation with my 20-year-old college undergraduate friend Cameron, who, as usual, was going to ramble across Hogsmeade, butterbeard to the gills, and ranting into his telephone about the latest Ravensclaw common room gossip, while I gave him life advice. I don't know. That was what was supposed to happen. But then I got into this text exchange with a friend, and it was as I realize is fairly common if you were somebody in the poetry world. It's pretty common to have text exchanges with friends about why something didn't work out, why something didn't get a prize, didn't get accepted, didn't get into a program, didn't get a job. It feels like that's most of the conversations I have with my poetry friends are about why something either isn't going to work out or didn't work out after all. So I was having one of those conversations, and I'll get into it a little bit during my talk with Cameron, but basically I tried to provide a complicated explanation for why some things might get into a magazine versus other things. And in the process of doing so, I included a phrase that I then instantly found repellent. And basically, this is a conversation in which I recruit Cameron to try to help me understand what that phrase is all about. Somewhat unfairly, I do ask Cameron toward the end of the conversation to provide a prescription, but for the most part, what we're really trying to do is just figure out how to talk accurately and not shittily about this subject that I am sure we fail at, and I'm sure we fail at that task continually over the next hour and change. I do think it's a pretty interesting conversation. And as I said, if you need something juicy to argue with me or your friends about, I think this episode might provide some material for you. I do invite you to write in with, maybe not furious emails if you can help. Maybe take a breath before sending it. But seriously, if you do have thoughts about how, suggestions about how we should be thinking about any of this, I truly would love to hear from you, because I honestly don't know. We don't end this episode with any absolute conclusions about any of this stuff. All right, very quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. There are new stickers. They're new SLEERICKETS stickers. They're pretty fucking cool. We got some purple ones, some weird metallic sparkly ones, and then some black holographic one. They're sort of hard to describe, but they are really cool looking. If you would like those, or any of we have some classic, red blue, black. If you would like any of those, then just sign up for The Secret Show, and I will send you some for free. So go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com. In addition to getting some cool stickers, you will also get an extra episode of Sleeve Rickets every week. All right. Anything else? Yes. I am going to be in Philadelphia. Let me get the date so I don't fuck it up, because Ernie Hilbert has been kind enough to invite me to read with Aria D. Matthews and Timothy Donnelly at the Everse Equinox reading for the spring, the vernal equinox, right? That's what you call it, the vernal equinox. So we are going to be reading the evening of Wednesday the 13th in Philadelphia at Fergie's Bar in the Center City, like Rittenhouse Square-ish, I believe. I will have a link in the show notes, and Ernie has lots more information about all of that. I think it'll be a fun reading. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to meeting Aria Matthews and Timothy Donnelly and seeing Ernie again and all the good people of Philadelphia, including previous guest of the show, Steve Tier, the cartoonist, and his brilliant and talented wife, Angela, who I would love to get on sometime to talk about something, because she used to be my work carpool back in Baltimore, and she's an interesting lady, and so I'm excited to meet their new daughter as well, which is because as established, I love babies. Is that it? Is that all for now? I think so. Secret Show, stickers, reading in Philadelphia, Wednesday, March 13th. What came up was basically like, well, this poem is at least as good as many of these other poems that have been published there. And so the question was like, well, is there something other than just the quality of the poem that's being considered? And the answer, of course, is yes. There always is something other than what just the poem itself is being considered. And often that's just like luck or time of day or what the editor had for lunch or something like this. I named a few things in particular, and they were things that might help explain why, if you're going through a magazine that you expected to publish good things, you might find mediocre work in it. Now, I am very cynical about the quality of almost all magazines, almost all the time, almost anyway, no matter what. Like, why anything gets published ever or ever has been published. I'm, as I said, we're talking to Matt, what's his name? No, what was his name? Matt something? Michael something? I forgot. Andrew Whitstad, that's his name.
Oh, Whitstad, yeah.
Yeah. My big objection to claims that like people aren't publishing good stuff anymore is the word of anymore. Like, people have always published a mix of stuff, a lot of bad stuff, and often, and most of it for silly reasons that have very little to do with the work itself. That's always been the case, and it always will be. And the various reasons, the various people in charge rotate over time. But one of I listed in listing some possible reasons that a given mediocre poem might have appeared in a magazine, setting aside the quality of the poem entirely, are that it was by somebody who was well known, that it was somebody who that the editor owed a favor to, or knew personally, or like basically like a personal connection, or that the person who wrote the poem I wrote the phrase demographically helpful, and as soon as I sent it, I thought, like, what a gross phrase, like what a gross, weird phrase. And yet, sending it, I thought, well, my friend in poetry will almost certainly understand what is meant, even if I have like infinite misgivings about the existence of that phrase and my use of it. Do you understand what I mean when I say that somebody might have been demographically helpful?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you understand me to mean?
I understand you to mean that they are of a group that, due to the current political, socio-cultural situation, it is helpful both from a purely sociological perspective, but also from the perspective of an arts magazine trying to gain brownie points in a basically left-wing social space, that they are of a group who will increase the magazine's own prestige for publishing that underrepresented group.
Right. Yeah. That in the same way that a magazine might be glad to have somebody's name in their table of contents, even if the work was not top shelf. They may be glad to have people of certain identities or backgrounds or genders in their table of contents, regardless of the quality of the work, or not, not necessarily regardless of it, but that may be a factor in addition to the quality of the work. Like, I have been adjacent to a lot of different magazines in a lot of different ways, like as a submitter, as a friend of editors, as somebody who was working on the magazine, as somebody who was, like sort of helping with the magazine or this or that and the other. And I've, or like helping to be, read as an initial judge for something. I've never been the final judge for anything, and I've never been the final editor for anything either. And I mean, I think I may have judged like a school thing once, like I've never, in any significant context. Not that lots of people have come asking me to edit a magazine or to judge a contest, but I suspect that, I mean, it is definitely, I am very happy not to be in that position. I'm very happy not to have that, not to have the buck stop with me. It is also, though, I think, like, it's worth acknowledging that it is possible for me to be more idealistic about publishing than I would have to be if, say, I were the guy, especially if it were my job. So, like, several different things are true in lots of different cases, and they all vary. Like, when I worked with a magazine back in college, I don't remember like ethnic identity or sex or demographics coming up at all in conversations. Granted, I was, the very bottom of the totem pole, and so maybe those were just above my pay grade, which was nothing, which was school credit. But I don't remember any talk about that at all. And in other cases, like other editors I've known or been, next to or corresponded with or this or that, have been, almost like philosophically opposed to taking identity into account at all. And then some have been very aggressive about it, and then most have been somewhere in the middle, where they don't want that to be determining all of their choices, but they want to be aware of it. But like, what are your, as like a young idealistic firebrand, what are your thoughts about this, like, as a proposition from the get-go for poetry editors?
It's interesting because I guess like I'm sort of suffused because of social media and YouTube in an environment where I'm constantly being barraged from like both ends of the political spectrum, with content about, you know, let's say diversity hiring and like diversifying many spaces of life. And I think particularly normally in people's sort of attention is sort of films and actors and content. And I normally come down quite firmly on the left wing side in that I think diversity is, it seems to me, obviously a good thing. And it seems pretty obvious that like groups of people have in the past been like almost, hunted to extinction and then later on just like ignored or subjugated or just sort of wiped from the mainstream. So it seems to me very logical and understandable and perfectly almost beyond argument that in our attempts to redress this as a society, that we should, focus more heavily on diversifying art. I mean, I'm probably one person who is pro positive discrimination. I mean, I got a whole other rant about how like I think the word discrimination is like very misunderstood in culture.
Yeah.
In that, like,
my guess is I agree with you on that. It's
yeah.
a much abused word.
With relation to the very small and obscure world of poetry magazine selection criteria, to an extent, I find it vaguely depressing. And like, there is a part of me that sort of recoils and is like, well, I'm not interested in this world. There's a reason that Emily Dickinson wasn't interested in this world
Yeah.
200 years ago, and it's for very well, contextual different reasons, but I feel like the underlying reason is the same.
It was wokeness, right? That's what she was. This is terrible. I can't deal with this. They've gone crazy.
No, I guess like what I find demoralizing is not that like we that is not that like the magazine can't publish, is not that like there may be a choice between a poem by a white guy and a poem by like I don't know, a guy who isn't white or a woman, and we go for the guy who isn't white or a woman. I don't find that demoralizing at all. I don't like that. That seems perfectly fine to me. What I guess I do find demoralizing is when a magazine will actively publish work by a guy who isn't white and a woman, even if that work is weak. And
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so I feel like there's a trap I really want to avoid dropping down here,
Sure. Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
like
It's all traps. It's
diver
traps all the way down. Like that's the problem
yeah,
with this whole
yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Like, and the trap, I think so the trap, at least on this level, is that like we can speak like good, like the norm for good work is produced by white men, and then like
Sure.
everyone
Yeah, yeah.
else's work is kind of suspect and probably worse. And this is bullshit, right? Like white men, like
Yeah, yeah.
most people, write mostly bad poetry. Most
Yeah, of
people write
course. Yeah,
mostly bad poetry.
yeah.
Talent is a random genetic gauge fired by years of training. So I don't want to fall down that trap. But I guess what I find demoralizing about this is not that we might be publishing work that's weak by a woman or someone who isn't white when we could be publishing work that's weak by someone who is white.
Right.
It's that
Yeah.
we're publishing.
Yeah.
That's not what I don't. That's not what I don't find that demoralizing. Or even
Yeah.
that we're publishing weak work by a woman or someone who isn't white when we could be publishing strong work by someone who is white. I don't even find that demoralizing. I guess what I find demoralizing is that we're publishing weak work in
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in the
Yeah. Yeah.
first place. That like we could
Yes.
be publishing strong poems by women and people who are not white. And on another side note, I have no fucking clue why people call poems weak and strong, and I really don't want to, and I'm going to try and resist from stopping it because it just feels very strange to me that like we can praise a poem and say this poem's strong and this poem's weak. Like
Yeah.
what the fuck does that mean? Like how's that got to do with like poetic craft or like emotional or like the vortex of language? Like these words seem very weird to me. But yes, I think at the bottom of this, why I'm demoralized is the fact that we're publishing bad poems.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And it's there is like one editorial philosophy that I have encountered, and that is not, like I don't embrace it, but I can to some extent understand it, as what I think of as the Don Share option, which is reject that there is goodness and like make your choices about what to publish
Well, a hopelessly terrible option.
on the basis of wanting to represent not just ethnicities, but like styles, groups, movements, countries, languages. This, having basically have like theme project issues where you sort of say like, well, goodness and badness are not really concepts that apply to poetry, so we're going to go about doing something else. And I don't think like what I don't think you could say about the Don Share option, certainly not in the case of Don Share's editorship of poetry, is that it's lazy, because I think there was an enormous amount of work that went into curating those issues. I just think they suck to read. But again, like that's me, right? I'm saying that, and plenty of people. I actually don't know if plenty of people would disagree. Like I don't know anybody who would say like, oh, I'm passionate about the kind of poems that came out under. And I don't want to shit on Don Scherr, because I think he's like, in a way, like he's somebody else. He's like he's been abused for the wrong reasons.
Well, like
He's been abused rightly for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
Don Scherr has been shit on by the people who he like wanted the most to,
right,
oblige
to win over.
editing.
Yeah.
Ironically.
Yeah. So I mean, and he has. My understanding is he has sort of vanished from poetry, from like the poetry world, which is a shame. And like before, that should not happen.
All I've seen
We
of
should
him,
get Don Chair on Flea Rickets. Come talk to us. Come tell us
he
what
would
we're
not.
getting.
He would not get on. He would
you
not come. Like
you
we'd
don't
be
think
wait.
he
No,
would get
because
on with a glass of wine and let loose?
well, you never know. Maybe they've
Yeah.
like pushed his bounds too far. But I
Mhm.
get the sense that like he's kind of like he doesn't want to cause any upset or be at the center of any controversy. I've seen one thing by Don Share since the
Okay.
Poetry Magazine meltdown, and that was an article about Hart Crane in the PN review, I think last year, which was fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Well, good. I mean, I'm glad to hear he's publishing some then. And publishing a little bit is not publishing none at all, as William
no.
Logan failed to recognize in the case of Catherine Tufriello, who like gave a reading last week. It's like very much an active poet. So okay,
So
so like, but I think that the good, like goodness, badness, this is a question that I feel somewhat in a way like comforted by, because I think it complicates the, like, what felt really shitty to me was being able to use the phrase demographically helpful to explain the presence of a mediocre poem.
hmm.
Like that sucked to me because I don't like,
And
in a
like
way,
it's
yeah. I mean, in a
what's
way, like
being
I'm less depressed by saying like, oh, this person is a donor, you know. I mean, because like you see, there is something really shitty that can happen very quickly with like, oh, what were there any good poems? Oh, these here are the mediocre poems by people who are not white. Like you can see how easily you can start to slide into this way of thinking that's like really poisonous.
right. And what's interesting is that like when you like when you're slightly more comfortable with saying this person's a donor and therefore we publish the poem,
Right.
is because it's more explicitly capitalist, right? Like it's there's something very
Yeah.
explicit there that there's a transaction has been made,
Yeah.
and
There's no
therefore
pretense
we
of
publish the
virtue.
poem.
There's no, yeah.
Hmm.
And in a
In
way, like it's less, you're being more honest even with the donor.
yes,
Like you're saying
yes.
like, you know what you're doing. You paid for this.
What's interesting about the phrase demographically helpful is that helpful here really is helpful to us,
Oh,
to
totally,
you,
totally.
to
Yeah.
the magazine,
Yes,
not to
absolutely.
the
Not to
we
the
like
poem and not to the
not to
poet.
the and not to the demography that we're trying to
No,
help.
absolutely
Yeah,
right. Yeah, not helpful to the person or the people.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And like
yeah,
that's what feels so, I guess, disingenuous about the phrase, that there's like something weirdly twisted, and that like what one assumes is that there's like a goodwill, even if the goodwill can be criticized as being sentimental or crass about trying to help out marginalized groups in this way.
yeah.
But
But that's
we're
not what
actually
this is at all.
that's not real. The
This,
helpfulness
yeah,
is to us, you
yeah.
know.
I mean, and in fact, the helpfulness, to the extent that it is helpful, because I think there are different versions. Like there are different ways people get motivated to make choices like this, and one of them is like a top-down directive, which is often fairly explicit. Like, hey, you need to include more X, Y, Z,
Mm,
by somebody who is, who's signing your checks.
mm.
Often, though, it's a more nebulous sense of pressure. Like, well, I don't want to be putting out a magazine that like either for virtuous reasons or for craven reasons. Like, I don't want to get yelled at, or like I want to make a point of like I don't like of including people, of actually diversifying the population that I'm publishing. That whether it's a sense of the zeitgeist, a response to that, or a response to well, I guess like whether it's a warm and fuzzy response to the zeitgeist, or a chilly and hateful response to the zeitgeist, it is usually a more sort of nebulous sense of like an obligation rather than a direct order given.
Yeah, yeah. Let's call them the Austin Allen response and the Andrew Woodstand response.
Wait, disambiguate. Help me with that. Yeah, what's the?
Was in like the warm and fuzzy response to Zeitgeist is Austin Allen, and the angry
Yeah,
response is Zach.
yeah.
You,
That's true.
you can
Yeah.
cut this part if you want.
No, right. Yeah. I mean, meaning like I think the way like there's something in the air. There's something in the way people are talking about ethnicity and gen. I mean, and honestly, what's funny is like definitely the what I have heard most often is actually we need more women. Like that's
Yeah.
for whatever reason that ends up being the thing I hear most often.
Well,
But
so
yeah,
when I was younger and I used to be on a website called Commercial Poetry, beyond as in I used to read this website. this was a very strange website that kind of became addicted
That's
to
like
the
saying
idea.
like when I used to be on Pornhub. Like, well, I mean, like, depends on how you slice it.
Yes, when I was on the Pornhub
But yeah,
of
poetry Pornhub.
poetry forums, which is this website dedicated to like obsessing about how the great poets of the 20th century were all like Aratuspherians or some bullshit, right? So
Oh, right, I forgot about that.
yeah, it's an
Like
insane bullshit
Yeats,
website.
Eliot.
M.A. Griffiths. It's ridiculous claim after ridiculous claim. But one of the things they had was they were talking about like they had so many, they made up words, they made up more words than the incels make up words. You know, incels like make
Oh
up
yeah,
words
yeah.
for things, like looks maxing for
I
like
mean
looking
that
good.
the
Like
thing
it's
about incel, the thing about
fucking
incel
insane.
slang, like incel jargon, is like unlike certain like there's slang that I find really annoying. Like Riz is terrible, terrible. Riz is terrible. Like that's current Gen Z slang for charisma.
Yeah,
That's
everyone
up
says it
there
now.
with like, oh my god, that's horrible. That's like when Gen X tried to say za for pizza or rents for parents.
Someone said Zerf pizza.
Yeah, and rents for the rents. I mean, and at least
I mean,
Riz
that
has
one
the
makes a
advantage
bit
of
more
like
sense.
making slightly like more prosodic sense because at least that's the
Mm.
stressed syllable. But Riz is terrible. Whereas incel ideology is horrifying. Incel jargon is hilarious. Looks
Oh, it
maxing
is.
is a
Yeah.
great way to say like beauty. Like it's just so
Yeah, yeah.
ridiculous. Or like
It's
what is it?
so
Jester
weirdly
maxing
basic.
is like when you're being funny. Like comedy is I mean, just like all of their, it's just hilarious. Great. Like there's something so juicy about incel jargon. But yeah, go on, go
The
on.
funniest thing I heard about Riz was I watched some video on TikTok where some guy was like, "Oh, guys, you haven't heard about my type of Riz. It's like joking Riz, guys. It's joking
Oh
Riz. I
God,
call it
joking Riz.
jizz. I'm
Oh
jizzing on these
Jesus.
girls all the time." So on this website, one of their little conspiracy theories was like about magazines and why, in their opinion, no magazine was publishing a good poem.
Right.
And they had these very complex ideas that like if a magazine editor was sent a good poem, the magazine editor wouldn't publish the poem because then they would want their audience would then expect from them poems of that quality more regularly, and that would make sourcing good poems harder to come by and
Yeah.
would mean
What
that
it
they'd have to
what it
shut off all their like sources of poetry. And this is why, according to this website, why magazines don't publish poems. Now that like I've
that is
had a
truly bird brained. That is
right,
truly
like now that I've had a tiny amount of experience in the poetry world, I'm like, oh no, that's utter bullshit. And clearly, none of the people who like made this website have ever edited a magazine. It's like
no, yeah.
that's clearly not why magazines are publishing bad poems.
No. No. Like what I will say is true across the board is that magazine editors are very excited when they get a good poem. Like when they get a
Mm.
poem, they genuinely admire. They're genuinely happy and excited. And like that's one of the things that's actually kind of heartwarming about there's so much that's shitty about the publishing world and poetry, but like one of the things that I find to be like fairly universal or like at least among like anybody who's not like a total psychopath is that you might be jealous of somebody for winning a prize or for getting published. I mean, certainly like that, but like everybody is happy to read a good poem. Like when you read a good poem, whether certainly if it's in your slush pile, but like it's like I get excited when I read a good poem by somebody.
So
You know,
how do you unify this with Don Cher's breaking down of goodness and badness? Do you think he was excited when he read a good poem, even though he didn't think that there were any good
I don't
poems
think.
because
Well,
goodness does
that's
not
the
count?
thing is I think he turned a laborious position into a position that was laborious and joyless. Like I think like the like editing can be really punishing and thankless, but there is also excitement. There's joy. There's something thrilling about saying like, holy shit, this just rolled in. Like this is so exciting. And I think he denied himself that pleasure
Mm.
in the way he edited the magazine. Which again, I think he was. I strongly disagree with his editing philosophy. I think he got a little bit of a raw deal the way things finally turned out in the end, and it certainly did not deserve to be run out of the
Mm.
poetry world forever. So
Yeah,
so
he got a
eighth,
terrible deal.
yeah,
Although
yeah, yeah.
to blame him slightly, if he'd just taken a little less interest in Twitter and just like hadn't caved to the first like
Yeah, yeah,
single
yeah, yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah.
multi-signed letter he'd received. He
Oh,
could
I
have
mean,
written it
it
out.
was a raw deal of his own making entirely. I
Mm,
mean, like he could not have done more to script that ending for himself at every turn. But it's still, yeah, it still sucks. And I wish him well. In a way, like I hope he's somewhere not editing anything and just writing poems.
yeah.
That would be wonderful.
And I will praise him for standing up for Toby when the fools tried
Oh
to
yeah, yeah. Actually,
attack
that's
Toby.
true. That was quite that was good of him. Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to say like nothing he did was valuable. I disagree with his broad philosophy in editing poetry magazine, but like a complicating factor with this question of goodness that means that it makes it like a little bit harder to say like, oh well, this is a white guy, but like so he like, or this is a good poem, but it's written by a white guy, so it's not getting it. I mean, as you've pointed out, like good things get rejected everywhere all the time anyway, like constantly. Like it's totally unremarkable for a poem to get rejected from anywhere ever for any reason, because poems just get rejected all the time.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
but like the there like a factor that slightly complicates the crummy feeling of explaining the mediocrity of a poem by identifying the ethnicity of the writer or the sex of the writer or whatever else, the identity of the writer, is what I think of as being like either not unwitting nepotism, but I think like it is true that when somebody who is very well known sends in a poem, editors are more likely to be they really want it to be good when they read it. And they're going to be much more likely to read it in a forgiving way, even totally separate from the question of like whether they're publishing it just for the name, they want to be publishing it for the quality. And so they're
Yeah.
excited to have this poem by this famous person, and they are really working with the poem to make it be good when they read it.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think the same is true whenever you get a submission from somebody you want to publish already. It's even true, I think, in cases where like you're soliciting work from somebody simply because you like her work.
Mm.
You definitely don't like if you say like, hey, would you send me some poems? I really love the poems some of your poems I've seen in these other places. Would you send me some poems? Sure. Here's a packet. When you open that packet, you really want that to be good, right? You
Yeah.
don't like you don't want to say like, oh well, this is a poet I admire and here's some mediocre work from her. Like
Mm.
you want it to be good. You work with it. You're collaborating with it as a reader to make it be good. And the same is true when you solicit somebody for this, that, or the other reason. I think what's also true is that like, and what I've seen like very consistently is that editors have social circles that like, and there's another factor here that I think does really complicate things. But like white editors tend to have white social circles, not exclusively, but like often and largely, and so
Right.
they're often drawing from their social circles. And furthermore, like when you have a certain social circle, you're not just it's not just that you think of those people or that you know them and so you owe them a favor or you feel inclined to accept them. You're actually more likely to think their work is good. Like your
Mm.
sense
Of
of
course.
goodness,
Yeah.
both because you want it to be good and because in part like your sense of what is good has probably been shaped by especially with poetry where you're often like you're growing up and working with people and reading them and kind of banging heads with each other for years before you get into any kind of position to read to edit. So like it's not even just that like you're doing them a solid, it's that like your understanding of what goodness is has been shaped in part by the people you're spending time around, and that often correlates to race, and it means that people that homogeneity breeds homogeneity. um
Moving from
yeah,
race to gender very briefly.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So, like you say, that the bigger problem seems to be even more than race, that we just don't, that journals, magazines don't publish that many women, or at least
Well,
some
I'm
journals
not
have a
saying
problem
that.
with
I'm
that.
saying the complaint I have heard from editors most often
Mm.
is I
Oh, yeah.
need more women.
Do you think, is that a problem of also social circles? Because I'm not sure that,
No,
like, it
it's
doesn't map
different.
quite
Yeah.
on the same,
No, it's
right?
it's totally it's the same reason that
Mm.
like feminists have pointed out. There is a whatever the parallel, whatever the comparisons between like racial civil rights movements and feminist movements, it's not obviously it's not universally true, and this is very heteronormative, but like, the old line would be like, well, but there's a woman in every house, right? Like at least you're sort
Right.
of like you're dealing with a known quantity to some extent that can work for you or against you, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like ethnicity tends to be split by social circles more than gender does, though there's certainly a lot of like boys clubs. Yeah, I don't honestly like, it's harder for me to understand, like, both because they're like, if you are making a point of reaching out to ethnic minorities because they are minorities, then like they are minorities, and so by definition, like there are fewer. With women, that's not what's happening at all. Like that's just not the case. It's not even the case that, like, I don't think that women, setting aside the numbers in the overall population, like I don't think there are fewer women writing poetry than men writing poetry. What I
No,
think
I don't
might be
think
the
so
case
either.
is I think women might submit less than men.
Hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
might be like, it may be that, there's a bulk of white men in the population of poetry writers, like there's a big number of them in that group, but it also may be that there's an overrepresentation just in the, like, they may be submitting the same poem more times
Yeah.
than women are. The other, well, sorry, I'll let you follow up on that, and then there's this other big complicating factor. But yeah, what do you make of all that? I don't, the gender thing I really don't understand.
Well, I do think it's also probably because of like recognition, right? In that women probably publish less because they feel like they're not encouraged to publish more. In like, there's a certain group of white men who like the world seems just like readily available to them. And it's like, of course, they'll submit poems to this magazine, it will help their career. And if this magazine therefore then has a problem publishing women because it's in this state of just publishing career building white men, then women aren't going to see other women in the journal and maybe instinctually or maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously feel as if that journal in some sense is not a place for them, right? Because it's just the home of like the white men career builders. And then that's going to lead to them submitting work less. So it's a sort of vicious cycle, right? In this sort of in
Yeah,
this gendered idea.
yes, but I want you to break something down. And actually, I'm going to open something up real quick because I want to look
Mm-hmm.
for my own sake, because you said there's a certain group of men who just, it seems like the world is just open to them and encouraging them. Uh, what group? What do you mean specifically?
So I don't mean all white men, obviously. I I mean like Ron Silliman. Is it Ron Silliman? I don't know.
Ron
Like
Silliman, yeah.
that I picked him randomly, but there's a certain group of sort of white poetry professors in their late middle to late age, and Ron Silliman may not be the best choice because he's kind of experimental. But I think there's certainly like a group of middle-aged poets who, like you've described them as like they're doing fine and they publish competent verse, but it's not particularly good and it's not particularly terrible, and they have like nice positions. And it seems to me like the world has been quite accommodating to them and has like given them a set of hoops that it has trained them to jump through. And they have jumped through the hoops and got into like a nice middle class position. And from which they publish their shitty, competent, like worthless poems.
And I think of this as being like a generational thing. Like yeah.
Yes. I mean, I don't. I mean, how far do we want to go with this? We could branch into like a conversation about patriarchy and
Sure,
about
sure,
like,
but I guess like, but I'm thinking about people submitting to magazines now,
mm,
and there is certainly an existing population of baby boomers and elder Gen Xers who, by my jaded millennial eyes, waltzed into poetry careers, a few decades ago, and seemed to take it as a given that they should be publishing a book every 2 years and just having poems placed everywhere. And they have enough residual prestige that they do tend to publish poems pretty effortlessly in a lot of places. Is that, do you think, like, do you see that happening consistently generation to generation?
I don't think I see that consistently, no. But I'd still say that like See, the poetry world, I think, is a slight outlier and it's so left wing that like it's probably not the place where someone said, if like some right wing person came to me and were like, white men are the new like oppressed class, I wouldn't say go and look at the poetry magazine world to prove you're wrong, right? I'd find like
Right.
I'd go
Well,
to
no,
like a
but that's
much
what I'm
more
saying. Like,
relevant
totally.
place.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, let's just talk about. And
Mm.
obviously, there's nobody lives only in one
No, no.
demimonde or whatever. But like, if
But
we are just talking about poetry,
what I do think is that I see that more still with formal magazines than I do with like
yeah,
the more famous poetry magazines that basically publish non-metrical poems. I think formal
yes,
magazines seem to me much more rife with a kind of instated group of like men who have been publishing metrical poems for a while and still get away
yeah.
with it.
Wait, still get away with publishing metrical
Well,
poems?
as in still get away with publishing their like mid-tier metrical
Yeah,
poems. Sorry,
that's
not
one of
get
the
away with
that's one of
publishing
the
metrical.
Gen Z's crueler coinages. Mid.
Oh yeah, is that
Yeah,
Gen Z going? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I
Do you
mean
want to
it's pretty
define
good.
that for our greatest
I
generation
mean
audience?
it's short for middle. It
Yeah, but
just
it's
means
people use it as an adjective.
yes.
Yeah,
It means sort of not egregiously terrible, but neither of much competence or worth. A sort
yeah,
of utter
and
banality.
cruelly applied at the at the drop of a hat, both to like major works of art and to like people's faces. So,
Yes,
like, yeah,
yes. Well put.
right, yeah, yeah. So I do think you're right that I what has started to happen in the last several years is I find I have a certain association, which is when I see a masthead or a table of contents and it is overwhelmingly white men, or in some cases, literally all white men, the thought that comes to mind is, and I mean, like, I'll say this: if I'm encountering a publication I don't already know about, like if it's cold and like all other things being equal, formatting,
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
presentation being equal,
sure.
the immediate association I have if I see an all white table of contents or an all white masthead is low in prestige.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Why?
I also
Explain
had
that.
this thought.
Explain that. Why?
Because I think the ones that are big in prestige have at this point cottoned on to the fact that they can help themselves out incredibly if they like utterly lean into like finding people of minority demographics and women and like filling their magazine to the brim of it. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Poetry Magazine has done this. The New Yorker has done this to a lesser extent, but the New Yorker is just doesn't care about poetry, like doesn't need to care about its poetry enough to care about this, I
Well, I
think.
think there's another conflating factor with the New Yorker actually, which is that the in my experience, the editors who have been least concerned with demographic helpfulness have been the ones who are not white.
Mm. Yes, that
In
may
some
be true.
cases, like they've all in some cases they're almost some are almost militant about not caring about it. But
Mm.
at least at the moment, the poetry editor of the New Yorker is Kevin Young.
You don't think
Um,
he cares about it?
I'm not saying he doesn't care about it. I make no speculation about his
Mm.
caring about it, but I do think
He
that
hasn't
like,
been he hasn't been one of the militant ones.
well, I mean, I also don't know him personally. I don't, of course,
Mm.
I've liked a lot of his poems. I do think he tends to publish too much. But the two observations I'll make are, in my own experience, not including him directly, I've just seen that it tends like the editors who seem to be least up, least worked up about it in any direction are the ones who are not white. In at least I'm thinking of in one case, like one who's almost like philosophically neutral on identity at all. But then in addition to that, I think if you are not white, you are less likely to feel a particularly white strain of neurosis about it.
Yes.
Like you're
And
less
also,
likely to think like, oh God, I'm going to be called racist, right? Which is the
right,
like the
yeah.
yeah quintessential white freak out.
What I do wonder, do you think if they're like, it's a non-white male editor, that they'll be more militant about publishing women?
Could be. Yeah, I think definitely could be. I can think of different cases, but yeah, like sometimes we'll like because that's the other thing is like they're also it's just like like you're when you go to a restaurant with a friend who waits tables, that friend will often be you and will always tip very well, but will also be like way less tolerant of bad service. And it is
Yeah.
sometimes I've found it to be the case that male editors will be more hands off with critical treatment of female writers, and often it's female editors who are not necessarily more critical of female writers, but are more willing to be enthusiastic about boring male writers, or not boring, but like identitary, like demographically boring. Okay, so I think you're right there. So when I see a racially homogeneous, I mean specifically an all white masthead or table of contents, my thought is this is low prestige. I think there are maybe three possible reasons for that. And often you can tell from context which of them it is. But in some cases, they are just like out of it. Like, just like, as you said, like they haven't cottoned on to like, to the cultural and whatever other advantages of ethnic diversity. Another reason is that they are like ideologically opposed to the consideration of diversity. They're conservative, or however you want to slice that. So there are some places that sort of proudly, like they're proudly all white,
Right. So
which
that they're either stupid or racist. Yeah. Yeah.
stupid, racist. And then there's a third possibility that is one I have encountered personally more often because I don't have a whole lot to do. Contra Austin, whom I love and who I actually heard lovely things about him from AWP. But like Contra Austin, like I don't actually like have much commerce with racist publications, nor do I have a lot of commerce with like stupid publications, and I haven't really in the past very much in either of those cases. But what is much more common in my experience, though maybe not more common overall, is people who are. It's not that they are low prestige because they are not publishing ethnically diverse writers. It's that they're not publishing ethnically diverse writers because they are low prestige. Does that make sense? That
Yeah. That
if
does that does that does make sense.
so
Mm.
explain how like your understanding of that.
Well, like to an extent, if you are like I think like it goes back to the kind of the cycle I was explaining of like women, but in a slightly different way. In that like if you're a poet and you're invested in making a quote unquote career out of the small poetry world, then you're going to go and publish poems in high prestige magazines. And
Yeah,
if you're ethnically diverse, you're going to want to publish a poem in a low prestige magazine because it's low prestige. And if you see it's full of white men, you're not going to want to publish a poem in a low prestige magazine full of white men because that makes a magazine seem slightly stupid and racist and less prestige. So there's like no point whatsoever in publishing a poem in that magazine, right? It's
yeah.
a zero sum game.
So sorry to clarify. You were saying there's that it's not. It's like there's a vicious circle, element to this that like
Yeah.
not having all white guys makes you less attractive, makes you more likely to have all white guys, makes you less attractive, etc.
Yeah.
But then there's also there are different reasons somebody might publish in a magazine. One of those is that it's a high prestige magazine. Another of those is that it publishes people or people you associate with, or people whose work you associate with, and so that's more likely to be a place that's not homogeneously an ethnicity excluding you. So
Yes.
that
Yeah,
seems
exactly.
true to me. I mean, I think another sort of crueler reason is the zero sum reason, which is that if you are no matter who you are as a poet, you don't have infinite poems. You don't have infinite time, and to the extent to which what we are talking about, and this is why the women thing is still a little puzzling. I think that truly, like, I do think the reason must be that men just submit more. But if we are talking about ethnic minorities, then by definition, there's a supply and demand question, right? So that when there are fewer and it may be like two things may be true. It may be that like there's a population that is a minority there may be a group that's like an ethnicity that's a minority in the larger population, but then I think it's possible that for historical reasons that may be an even smaller minority in the poetry world, right? Like the minority
Yeah.
status gets exaggerated and majority status gets
Yes.
exaggerated by
Yeah.
people looking for, I mean, this is where people get into questions about representation mattering and like what seems like a viable career to you. And, even for me, growing up, I don't, I was going to say, I'm not sure whatever the ingloriousness of my poetry career, it's not like it was, there's a different glorious career that I had ahead of me. But I do remember like being aware of there being lots of writers from, often decades or centuries before who I looked at as models in various ways. And
Mm.
they were almost all white. So I think like there's certainly some truth to that like question of representation and along with, whatever educational or social structures around it at the time. So there's a reason that like, it's not just that a group is already an ethnic minority. It's that minority status gets exaggerated in the population of poets submitting work. And then if in fact the hip thing to do, the knowing thing to do, the with it thing to do is to make sure you have a very ethnically diverse table of contents, then you're going to be more desirable and you're going to go with the highest bidder, right? You're going to go publish in like every poet, regardless of who he is or who she is going to try to publish in the best places that they can, right? And
I wouldn't say every poet, but I'd say some,
sorry,
but
yeah, well, I
a
would say like
majority.
as a rule, yeah, not every poet without exception, and there are exceptions, not like there's I think a rule I've heard from a lot of poets is that they try to publish in the best places they can unless you solicit, right?
Yeah.
But depending
I
on the supply and demand, it may be that you're getting solicited from a lot of people and you're going to go with the people you think are the best.
yeah.
And so if you
So
are a low prestige magazine, it is actually going to be harder and harder and harder for you to attract people who have this additional desirableness.
So I have two questions. I
Please,
think
yeah.
I'll say one for later on, maybe because
Yeah.
it'll probably lead us astray a little bit. But going back to the women,
Yeah.
do you think also that unlike ethnic minorities, women, we've had female poets,
Yeah. Yeah.
less
Yeah. Yeah.
recorded than male poets
Sure.
for obvious patriarchal reasons, but we still have. It was interesting, two of the most formidable examples of great female poets in American history are Emily Dickinson and Elizabeth Bishop, one of whom did not publish in magazines, and the other of whom
Was
was
Canadian.
very famous for yeah, yeah, and also very famous for constantly reading, entering a kind of
Sorry.
perfectionist.
You start that over because your audio clipped.
The second of whom, apart from being Canadian, was also notable for being like a perfectionist on her work, right? And rewriting a lot of poems. So both these models present us with people who treated publishing either as a non-existent tool or as a kind of minimalist tool, right? And I do wonder if maybe women have these role models to go to, while like men have poets like Whitman and Berryman who squeezed out poems, right, and published them all like
Yeah.
continuously. And I wonder if like there's a kind of male model of production and a female model of production, which maybe influence gendered approaches to publishing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's possible. I mean, it's funny because like there are like Vita does there are various people who do different versions of this, but like Vita is a group. I can't remember what the acronym stands for something, but it's a feminist organization, and they count. I know they do it in playwriting where they'll like count the number of female playwrights and the number of female directors, and they'll count sometimes like the number of books getting reviewed and these sort of things. I don't know all of the arenas in which they do it, but they do that kind of bookkeeping at the end of the year, and it tends to show where there's, I think they focus on sex discrimination. But in addition to those kind of accountings, I think it would be fascinating to see numbers that would be impossible to get, which is like like what is the breakdown of the slush pile? I mean, I can tell to the extent to which I've had experience with slush piles in a couple of different instances, the breakdown is heavily white and male. But I don't know, again, if that's like just the magazines I've been at, none of which have been like super prestigious. Those, I mean, to actually, well, some more than others. But yeah, I mean, I would also be interested in seeing, like, even just like, as you said, among poets who are respected and accomplished, what kind of numbers they're putting up in terms of publications, and even like just like books published, poems published. I do think, like, yeah, looking at Emily Dickinson, was her collected is big, but I'm not sure it's all that much bigger than like Lowell's collected. Like, if you did a Berryman that included the dream songs, I don't know that it would be bigger than that. And Bishop was extremely sparing about what she published. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a male. I mean, because there are also male poets who did that. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some if there were some differences there.
Jeffrey Hill has an interesting quote about Whitman going to kind of like hyper masculine defensiveness when anyone sort of criticized or discussed poetry with him, and how this seems to compare with Dickinson, who kind of hid behind a kind of cramped feminine decorum to kind of conceal parts of herself or like obfuscate it when it was necessary. And I do wonder, maybe this also might be trackable onto publishing.
Yeah. So I guess like a broader question I have then about some of this stuff is, because I know I felt gross using the phrase demographically helpful, though it's certainly not, maybe the first time I've said that, I may have said things to that effect. And I've certainly said in other cases like, oh, well, he's just a white guy. Like, I mean, I've definitely heard from like many editors in many different contexts is some version of the sentence like, "Ooh, we've got too many white guys." Like, "Oh, we have enough white guys." Like, no more white guys. And I know like some parts of this feel more gross to me than others. I don't love the way I don't love any of it. Like, to me, it just seems like a bundle of problems without any perfect solutions. But I guess like my question is, as our judgmental Gen Zer, like, what would be a good or better way to think and talk about this stuff?
It's really putting me on the spot. And I've just been applying to like consultant firms or internships, and they've been turning me down. And maybe this is proving why
You're gonna go be a hatchet man for
I'm gonna destroy companies' workforce.
Write your poems at night.
I don't know, Matthew, is my first response, because I find it so demoralizing that I don't, not that I don't care, but to some extent I don't care. Like,
you find some of it demoralizing. You don't find all of it. I mean, what is it? Like, the demoralizing part you find is that I was saying, like, and here's some mediocre poems, or here's some reasons people publish mediocre poems. Like that that's the part you found demoralizing.
So I think a while ago I said something like, and the new formalists had no black poets. And someone wrote in and said, this is not true. XXXXXXXX are all black or something. Sure. Which, like, I can't argue with that. I overstated a point. But I do wonder why we have to turn to mediocre work for helpful demographics. Like, why aren't there enough good poets from helpful demographics that we can turn to? Not that why aren't there enough good poets from helpful demographics? Why aren't there enough good poets that we can turn to now? And I think maybe if the magazine just didn't care about fame, then the language could be much more helpful. But I think,
like, basically like magazine, giving up fame as a deciding factor. Yeah.
If you actually want to make this morally credible, you're going to have to give up on something. And I think it's probably fame. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to build a good literary magazine and not fall back on helpful demographics, where helpful is really helping you out and not people from oppressed races. Like, either give up on fame or just live with the moral murkiness of the situation.
So this is, I'm reminded a little bit of like the calls for like, oh, well, if you're going to get rid of affirmative action, then you should be getting rid of legacy admissions. And like I certainly feel no inclination to defend legacy admissions. You know what I mean by legacy admissions?
I'd never heard of that before. I can guess, but
Yeah,
you can
okay.
define it.
You heard about the affirmative action controversy, and you know what that term means.
Is there a specific controversy you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean there was a Supreme Court case where
Oh, I don't know
basically
that much
dealing.
about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, and I'm not a legal scholar and whatever, but the basic idea was that specifically at Harvard, among some other places, there were some Asian plaintiffs who complained that basically it wasn't just that when people applied to college, Black applicants got there. It's not just that their applications were given extra points for their ethnicity. The Asian applications were given negative points for their ethnicity. That it was easier to get in, meaning like the standards were otherwise lower if you were Black, and it was harder to get in. The standards were otherwise higher if you were Asian. And the Supreme Court made a decision a lot of people were unhappy with for complicated reasons, but I think to my understanding is they basically said like you can't consider ethnicity explicitly in applications, and as everyone's pointed out, there are lots of other workarounds and things. A follow up to that then was like, oh well, if you're going to say people can't consider ethnicity when deciding whether or not to admit a student, they should also not be able to consider legacy, and legacy just means did your parent go here, basically? Did your like is your dad an alum?
Oh, do you consider that? Oh, yeah, I've heard about how
schools definitely consider that, and often
Mm.
it is the more prestigious schools who consider it more, often because an alum there means somebody who actually may have some real money, and so that often is like a very strong fundraising base. I can't be moved one way or the other about what Harvard does with anything about anything in any like I don't give a shit about Harvard at all. But like I think it's a fair quite basically like what you're saying is get rid of caring about. I mean, you may say like get rid of the nepotism, get rid of like publishing your friends, but also get rid of publishing famous people, and that will. I mean, but I guess like
I'm
I'm
not
not
sure.
sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
quite saying that.
Okay.
What I was saying is, I don't think what I'm trying to say is that you should get rid of nepotism, because at the heart of nepotism, I think with a lot of editors is the sincere belief that their friends are good poets. So it seems to me that you're enforcing too much of a harsh regime. You're denaturing the quality of their art. What I'm trying to
Yeah.
say is, if you will always they're always behind the claim, oh, we need to get more Black people, oh, we need to get more women, or we need to get
Right.
more Asian poets.
Yeah.
Behind this, there will always be the claim that like always the knowledge that you're doing this not just because you actively want to make more Black and Asian poets and more women enter into your journal, but also because you want your journal to be with the cool kids who are doing this, and therefore
Totally.
your journal
Totally.
will be
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
prestigious.
Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
why I'm saying that this will only change if you give up on wanting your journal to be prestigious. If you give up on the fame
Okay.
impulse, then
Okay.
yeah,
So,
then
but then,
you can become morally respectable if you
okay. So,
desire
but
that.
then what? So, what does that look like in submissions and publication then? Like, what choices are you making? Because what
I
you're
think,
telling us is to stop caring about something, but what does that?
yeah,
How does that affect your actual choices?
I imagine that it may at some point slow the magazine down because you stop want publishing lesser work by poets who are women and not white, because that will fill out an issue and help increase the prestige.
Right.
You start actively sort of hunting around for,
Yeah.
good poets, not just because you want to increase your prestige, because you just actively want more more non-white poets and more women in the world who you
Yeah.
also believe are really good,
Well,
right?
and to be fair, like my experience is that in most cases, the same anxious white editors who are counting ethnic representation are also doing a lot of solicitation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I think that is like because like yeah like the conventional answer is like the solution to homogeneous social circles is outreach, right, is like going out to make a point to reach out to people to solicit work from them rather than waiting for them to come around to you. I would say that is usually happening. Sometimes it is impeded because you don't like if you were going to reach out to some white poets, it would be a lot easier to come up with that list, right? And so like there is some challenge to that, but my experience has been that that's a pretty widespread practice. And so and part of it is that it is a widespread practice, and so you start to have that supply and demand question again. I mean, I will say my experience with solicitations for both for this podcast and when I've solicited as an editor in the past, I've never been the top man, but I've worked as an editor, has been that I will almost always get a response from a white man, no matter how famous. I will almost always get a response from a white woman, no matter how famous. The more famous ones are less likely to send work or to say yes to an interview. The chances of getting absolutely no response at all skyrocket when soliciting work or interviews from non-white writers. And what's surprising is it's both. In fact, I would say it is often the more famous minority writers are more likely to respond. The least likely to respond are the mid or lesser known non-white writers.
I have no answer for that. I have curiosity, but I have no answer.
Well, I mean, that last wrinkle about the famous, not, that part is a little bit more mysterious. Though my other suspicion is that, as in all cases across all demographics, people who do more do more. Like if you want somebody to help you out, you ask your busiest friend. You don't ask your friend who has tons of time to spare. There's a reason that friend has tons of time to spare. But the other part of it, I think, is that if you're more likely to answer a solicitation if you're not getting 50 a day. And you're more likely to answer the ones that are from places that you've already heard of.
Yeah, that's true. Can I ask my other question?
Please.
So recently, or some time ago, a friend of mine who likes my poems, was talking to me about my poems and saying, what I like especially about them is that then they don't seem designed with any interest towards a poem that would be accepted by a sort of a typical poetry magazine. And then he supplemented the sentence with a second sentence, which is a question where he said, can you imagine if like Baudelaire or Dickinson cared about making their poems palatable to magazines of their time? So I guess my first question is, what do you think, how would you describe a poem that is like geared towards poetry publishing? And I guess my follow-up question would be, do you think most poets of the past that we now consider great paid any attention to sort of the literary magazines that surrounded them, if magazines did surround them?
Okay. So I'll answer the second question first, which is that one should never underestimate a writer's capacity for vanity and neurosis. My experience is that all writers are vain and all writers are neurotic.
I mean, I definitely am. So
yeah, sure, I would be surprised if pick a writer you admire, and chances are that writer was obsessively comparing careers and publications and agonizing over what gets published where, and probably at least at some point in her career or in his career made some gross compromises to try to get public. Like, I just think like that's,
I mean,
it's so universal. Well, no, I mean, like, again, she is a real exception. Yeah.
Yeah, but you said pick a writer I admire. And I do think Dickinson was vain and neurotic. Yeah. But not in that way, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I know she had a very, very, very limited, very sort of weird, contextually weird publication during her lifetime, not in a normal sense, and not, like she was mostly unpublished. But I don't, like, I would be surprised if she didn't have some very recognizable feelings and internal monologues about that. But yeah, I mean, I do think that, like, that in part, like part of your job as a poet is to have all of your neurotic feelings, but then make artistically sound choices about what you actually publish. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think like probably yeah, I don't I mean what I'm more puzzled by is the first question because I don't know what I would really love to hear from your friend is like a which magazines is he thinking of and b what are those qualities
Mm.
because I don't totally know. I mean, I think you can sometimes identify sort of a house style, though often that is like that will be more superficial than anything. Like some kind, like are the words spread out all across the page? Is there a lot of lack of punctuation? Is there a lot of all are the poem or the letters all lowercase? Is there do the poems look tidy and lined up all left on the left side of the page? Are they doing other things like a lot of it is typographical style rather than the actual content of the poems. I know I have my own prejudices, I have my own preferences, and but I've even spoken to a number of editors about this. Like part of what, and most, I mean, you think like again, most thoughtful, responsible editors feel similarly that you definitely want to publish stuff that you just love. That's just like, oh, this is right up my alley. This is great. Like, yes, you do generally want to publish that. I would say Adrian Matejka and Don Scher. I fear Adrian Matejka is taking the Don Scher route, though he may be a more savvy executor of it. But like most thoughtful, responsible editors will say, in addition to the stuff that I already know I like, they want to find interesting stuff. They want to find stuff that's challenging. They want to find stuff they can't totally account for, but like, hey, there's something here. I am a little bit skeptical of critics or editors. William Logan is somebody who talks like this, and I'm always skeptical of him when he talks like this, who feel capable of inerrantly judging work, right? Like he seems
Mm.
truly to believe that you can put any poem in front of him and he can subject it to his own critical acid test and he can identify, he can sort of like test the purity. It's like he's the guy in the crime movie. He's like the nerdy guy that the crime boss brings along to like test the cocaine, who then turns to him and says, it's 98% pure. Like William Logan believes he is that guy. And like
Yeah.
I'm super skeptical of people who have that belief about themselves.
Oh
Most
yeah.
editors I know are able to say like, hey, there's something going on here. Like this is interesting, like they're kind of game for that sort of thing. I truly don't know what it would mean to write a poem that was, again, there are certain magazines where you can make some assessments about that, but it's hard to say like what is a
I do wonder if
yeah
like it's not exactly that the poem is working against, is like actively attempting to discourage certain tropes of poems you find in journals, but it has its own kind of singular vision or aesthetic that seems just disinterested in like playing along with like those tropes, or like playing along with a kind of, I guess maybe idiosyncrasy is at the heart of this. Maybe the poem's just simply idiosyncratic in a way that not that most poems in journals aren't, and therefore its cleaving to its idiosyncrasy makes it seem disinterested in journal poems.
yeah it's not derivative.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I think like genuine originality is appealing to most editors. Yeah.
What, by the way, on William Logan, I think
Mhm.
like the other thing that like proves that he isn't this sort of cocaine tasting genius critic is that he has a very limited critical vocabulary, right? Like I've never read a William Logan article that like explains a poem brilliantly by showing you like its techne and its sort of depth of aboriginal genius. His way is just normally saying there is some, these lines are good, or there's something in here,
Yeah.
right?
He's his
He's an
yeah,
inarticulate critic.
it's the inverse of the David Orr essay, right?
Mm,
Where it's
yeah,
like check this out. Like did you he whips out the line for you and then he just expects you to respond correctly to it, either
yeah.
for good or for ill in many cases. Like look how bad this line is or look how good this line is, and then that's it. That's all he's got to say.
I was talking to my thesis advisor about Jeffrey Hill the other day. My thesis advisor said that he went to some event Oh no, he talked to another poet who had been to an event where Hill had like been reading a poem by Elizabeth Bishop out aloud and then like stopped on one line and then apparently like very politely and very delicately tore the line to pieces, like on a technical level. And the poet had shown my thesis advisor this line, and like my thesis advisor was saying like he could never look at that Bishop poem again because it wasn't like Hill had like launched some malice, like an attack of malice against her. It's that like he very calmly and very crystallinely like demonstrated how technically awful one line in this poem was, and it changed the poem utterly.
You know, I know I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but you know the Browning poem Andrea del Sarto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that the passage I'm thinking of in that, where he looks at the
I
Raphael
haven't read it in a
sketch?
while.
Yeah, here I'll pull it up just because it's so good. So it's about Andrea del Sarto, who's a Renaissance Italian Renaissance painter. He was known for being the perfect paint, the flawless painter. His basically his paintings were always correct. He always had the anatomy, the frame, the posture, the perspective. Everything was always technically flawless. And then he has this little passage where he did a study of, I think it's Raphael. I'm going to find it because it's so good and it's exactly relevant to this. Yonder's a work now of that famous youth, the Urbanate, who died 5 years ago. I think the Urbanate from Urbino, was that Raphael from Urbino? Yeah. So it's Raphael. Yonder's a work now of that famous youth, the Urbanate, who died 5 years ago. His copy, George Vasari sent it me. George Vasari's famous painter and biographer of painters, who died. Do you know this? George Vasari died. He was working on the interior of Brunelleschi's dome in the Florentine Duomo, and he fell into the dome.
Jesus, no.
Yeah, like
Like what?
amazing,
Like
crazy death. He fell off of his. He was like painting the interior of the amazing dome, and he fell in and just like into the
wow.
cathedral. That's how he died. At least that's my recollection. But so this is Andrea del Sarto commenting on basically like a sketch, a study of a Raphael painting. He says, "Well, I can fancy how he did it all, pouring his soul with kings and popes to see, reaching that heaven might so replenish him above and through his art, for it gives way." And then he says, "That arm is wrongly put." And there again, like he got the arm wrong. Like the anatomy is just structurally it's incorrect there. He says, "A fault to pardon in the drawing's lines, its body, so to speak, its soul is right. He means right. That a child may understand. Still, what an arm! And I could alter it. But all the play, the insight and the stretch out of me, and wherefore out? Had you enjoined them on me, given me soul, we might have risen to Raphael, I and you," he's speaking to his wife. "Nay, love, you did give all I asked, I think, more than I merit, yes, by many times." And then where is it? Anyway, he goes on for a while, but it won't basically he corrects the drawing. He says like, "This is how the arm should look," but then he says, "But it's worse. It's worse." And that's where he actually says, what he has is a greater perfection, but then he says, "But less is more," which is where we get that expression. And so he's not talking about minimalism there. He's saying less perfection is like basically the perfection was too inhibiting, whereas Raphael was a little less perfect, but he allowed him to be both more ambitious and more willing to reach for like a different kind of truth and beauty. But yeah, that's what I thought of when I meant, like, because it's again like it's both like a perfect technical insight to identify what's wrong with it, but also like such compassion and gentleness and like deep understanding as a fellow craftsman. That yeah, I love that idea, and my guess is that Hill would probably like simultaneously, be appalled at all of the errors, but also it would be as if something were like Del Sarto. He has a moment where he corrects the drawing in charcoal, but then he fixes it back because it feels like sacrilegious to change. It's like, well, no, you can't alter it. It has to be what it is.
Yeah, and I think like the Hill Del Sarto school of criticism is very easy opposed to the Logan school of criticism,
Yeah,
which is much, much more inferior.
and has so far like so much less. That's the wild thing, is it's so much less reverent. Like Hill can be extremely critical while still it's like it's a criticism born of like a really sincere love, both for the
Yes.
art
Yeah.
and often for the artist. I mean, he like nobody loves poetry, or but I would also like nobody loves poets as much as Jeffrey Hill loves like really, really remarkable, really good poets. He really like there's a real care there in him, and I don't see that from Logan. I see him elevating certain lines and certain poems. I seldom get a sense that he has like a devotion, a love, like a real human feeling for another poet. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. He
Though
he seems
I got a little whiff of that with the Tufariello. It made me think like, was there a conference long ago? I don't know. Yeah,
maybe.
I got a little hint of that humanity in that one, strangely. All right, so I'm gonna and at the beginning and the end of this, I'm gonna invite lots of angry emails from people about everything that we're getting wrong here. But like, yeah, my conclusion is like I feel bad about all of this and confused about all of it, and I don't have like I can't find a good way to think about it. Like if Nietzsche is abortion for men, then I feel like this is the trolley problem for editors. And I think like it's so easy to say, well, just be purer of heart or just stop caring about this or stop caring about that. But I think again, like it's never been my job. Like it's, if you want, if you're the editor, you're responsible not just for publishing the best work, but for like making the magazine be successful in some sense. And so to some extent, it's a pipe dream to say like stop caring about prestige. Like in many cases, that's like explicitly their mission that they're given.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just saying this
Sure,
is
sure, sure.
what,
Yeah.
if you
That's what it would
truly
take. Yeah.
wanted to make yourself feel better, then stop caring about prestige. Like,
Okay. Like basically take like choose success or choose like even like striving for success
Mm.
or peace of mind.
Yeah,
Like,
well, like
yeah,
publication
okay.
is the auction of the mind of man. Like,
Wait, say that
Dickinson's
again.
still right. Well, what Dickinson says, publication is the auction of the mind of man.
I missed that. Good. Yeah. Poetry publication is like what do you call the like it's like the not even the black market. It's like poetry's like the black market counterfeit of man's mind. It's like
Mm.
poetry's like when somebody sells you a fake Louis Vuitton purse.
Well, so when I think Hill says something in a lecture, he's like all these I would if someone sold me contemporary poetry, if I was selling someone contemporary poetry, I'd feel like I'd be giving them a very rough deal or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, you said Nietzsche is abortion for men?
Oh, that was my joke when we did because basically I was saying like I did Alice wanted to do like the abortion episode, which I could understand putting a lot of people off, and then you and I did the like let's talk about Nietzsche episode, which is in that sense abortion for men. Like here's a thing like at least some stripes of men love to like really get their hooks into and really just dig into and like talk about all day long and find infinitely fascinating. And then a lot of people, many of them women, would say, I have no interest in that whatsoever. At least like Joanna is definitely among those. Like no interest whatsoever in hearing about Nietzsche.
Okay. I feel like we can only sustain this dialogue for a long time before I say that like you claiming that women have no interest in Nietzsche is bullshit. And
Right.
then we sort
Yeah.
of
No.
go
No.
round in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
circle.
Clearly. Yeah. But no, like insofar as like abortion is a it was a insofar as that was like a women's topic. Nietzsche was my joking like counterbalance to that. Like, and here's one for the
Mm.
boys. Yeah. So this is one for no one. This is one for nobody to feel good about. And I still don't. I still feel confused. And I still feel like basically my choice slash fortunate lack of success that has allowed me never to be the guy in charge of the contest or the magazine or the press or the whatever is makes me a very smart pussy basically. like,
Mm.
like
Well, I
yeah
feel like I don't really mind editing magazines, but I have so little interest in submitting to them that for me, a
yeah
lot of these questions are
sure
kind of academical. I don't know.
yeah it feels a little bit
Um,
like when I first played baseball and I came home from practice and I said yeah I think I just like the batting part. I was like, yeah, you and everybody. That's how,
okay,
exactly.
I see what you did there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure in 5 years I'll be neurotically complaining that the New Yorker hasn't published me yet.
Yeah, I mean, if
Sure.
you are neurotically complaining that New York hasn't published you yet in 5 years, then you will be a pretty successful poet, I would say. Okay, well, might have lost Cameron for the night. I'm gonna put you on speaker here.
Oh, is this? We gonna do this?
I mean, the quality will be garbage, but I think we're probably at a good finishing point. But yeah, I think we're ending anyway. So you want a last garbled word?
Love Nietzsche.
Women love Nietzsche. Men love abortion. That was my conversation with Cameron. Please do, again, write in and let me know if you have thoughts about how we should be thinking about any of this stuff. If they're sort of questions we flubbed or angles we're not considering or ways of thinking about this or not thinking about this, or if we should just not even be talking about it at all. Just having some idea of how to frame the problem in one's mind would be great, because I still don't have any fucking idea. So please do write in and let me know what we got wrong. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. Do go check out The Secret Show at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Ask for some free stickers, and I will happily send them your way. And come see me March 13th in Philadelphia at Fergie's Pub. I think it'll be good. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you all again very soon. Until then.